to another episode of EnvironMental with Dandelion. This is our podcast where we dive deep into issues around business and sustainability. And we are your hosts. I'm Court, and that's Ob. Today we are speaking with Shanley Harruthoonyan, who is an entrepreneur and founder of Able Ecosystems. Such an incredible platform. Able is a digital supply chain ecosystem for food, beverage, and textile companies in order to help build transparency and community between businesses and suppliers, which we're obsessed with. This is such an innovative system that is bringing farmers and raw material manufacturers online to share data to help brands to really create better, more impactful, more sustainable products. So snaps to you, Shanley. Thank you so much for being here.
I am so excited to be here and thank you. That was an amazing. I'm going to take notes down because I think you describe it better than I do. So thank you for that. Super excited.
I was inspired by your words. Absolutely. So let's just jump into it. I suppose this is such an incredible platform, but what do you, in your opinion, what is the number one thing that you want people to know about Able Ecosystems?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, like more than like specifics about like the product or anything like that, I think it's helpful to know that Able comes from a place of sort of reframing how we think about supply chains. And that for me, it came from a perspective of being in international development, having a manufacturing company for several years myself, and really, understanding that supply chains are fit in kind of what you could think of, or we call in systems change practice, like a nested system, right? Where you have like cultures and you have economics and, you have all these things factoring into supply chain. And the questions became, before Able was started, what is a lever or what is something that we could create that is a single catalyst that can start moving supply chains in a direction of more equity and of being able to do more good in the world rather than just being extractive. And I think for me, that sort of became a question about, the fundamental role of who's in the supply chain and how they interact. Mm-hmm. So it is not meant to be like an end all be all. I think a lot of conversations I've had around supply chain and around products can tend to go towards, do you track things and tell me what to do with the information and tell me how to fix it? And for us, it was like, what's one really simple thing that we can do well? And that became connection and conversations. How do we facilitate better information sharing, better conversations, more informed conversation between entities in the supply chain? So we sort of said like, let's on purpose table, we tell you to exactly what you should do better, or we mark whether or not you do or don't fulfill a certification. We're not a certification on purpose. We're not telling you what we think you should do on purpose. Instead, we're trying to be this safe space and this like digital container for better relationships to be built. So it is mostly a platform for communication, and in having communication with the entities in your supply chain to then we do kind of the legwork to turn that communication into math.
That's incredible. Thank you so much, because the communications around supply chains, or even just, as you say, like understanding who's building your products or where your stuff is coming from, is a huge part of any business. And for us in the marketing side of it, is really great that we would be able to ask a client like, do you know one of the farmers that are on the farm? Can we talk to them? Can we ask them questions just to make your storytelling better? Like, that's amazing.
And I love that question about making your storytelling better, because I think that there's been this kind of history of relationships and supply chains being transactional because there's been a race to the bottom, because it's been all about economics, and I think that we've asked supply chain entities to enter into a new type of relationship, I think, without naming it in a lot of ways. Right? Like we've shifted from let's make the cheapest good possible, or even not that, let's make the most luxurious good possible, to let's actually change the nature of our relationship so that we're not just doing that, we're also trying to improve environmental outcomes together. We are also trying to improve social outcomes together. And we haven't in so many situations named like, hey, we're entering into a new type of relationship. This is separate from our other relationship, or is a new, it's like an upgrade to it. There aren't new rules for it. There aren't new dynamics for it. You know, like often in a conversation, if you and I are going to shift from we're just transactional to friendship or to, you know, something different about our relationship, we're going to have signals for it. I think we're missing those signals. And a lot of what we're trying to do is help put like some guardrails around that, where a farmer might actually feel comfortable talking and telling a story to you because they're not afraid, oh, this is going to be punitive if I say the wrong thing or I accidentally screw it up, which has sort of been the dynamic of this transactional relationship. But if they're involved, then they're valued in a different way, you know.
It makes a lot of sense. Yeah, that like previously, because it was so transactional, I would think that suppliers would likely be apprehensive around sharing issues that they're facing, right? Struggles in producing, you know, with all of the regulations and all of the new kind of ways that in which businesses want, like all of that work gets put onto the suppliers essentially. And if you're not having open dialogue with them, probably, yeah, it's a struggle to kind of give that safe space for them to share that information. So this like fundamentally changes the kind of conversation, and I think in like a really human way, in a way that like businesses should be operating. So I think that's a really, really awesome kind of opportunity, I think, to just open up more conversation.
Yeah. Do you see that farmers really appreciate it? Or I guess like within the supply chain, who do you think is the most excited to jump into this sort of relationship?
It's a good question. I think a lot of times it's definitely been certain farmers. I think because you know, there's when we did research for this platform, there were all these really interesting like local newspapers or like kind of information that used to be published that kind of has gone by the wayside in terms of just ways for farmers to connect with each other or kind of understand what's going on in the market. And there hasn't really been a mechanism for that around sustainability. You have like an auditor come to your farm, or you have maybe like information passed to you about practices, but we're kind of taking, you know, when you get your like electric bill and there's that great activation that's happened, at least in the US, where it's like, oh, you did X% better or worse than your neighbor on. So we kind of do like a replica of that where farmers share information and then they're also given back this visibility of how they compare to others in terms of practices, and where they're just able to understand more where they sit in things. So there's been excitement around that. I think that the other group that has been most excited, like definitely we've seen excitement from brands, but who jumped in the fastest is like tier 3 suppliers, which I think is really cool because you hear so much negative about like raw material suppliers not sharing information and in kind of changing the dynamic of actually trying to help them better track information and being like a conversation opener for them. There's so much they're willing to do and share. And I think they're just excited. You know, even in Latin America, we've had suppliers say like, oh my gosh, no one's ever built me a tool that was in Spanish before. And they're thrilled. So that's been
cool.
Yeah, really cool to see.
Talk about accessibility and inclusion. I mean, that's amazing, right?
I know. Yeah, you would think that would already exist, but yeah.
Yeah. So speaking of roles, we're going to ask our favorite question in the show. But before we jump into that, I do want to remind our audience to like this video and subscribe to the channel so that you don't miss any inspiring sustainability story that we have. We're here twice a month, every other Wednesday for you. Okay, so Shanley, what is the role that you and Able Ecosystems plays in the transition to a more sustainable future?
Yeah, I think we think of ourselves as a connector and as, I mean, like a conversational catalyst, if you will. So I think there's others that are like so well equipped to talk about what that sustainable transition should be, how it happens. We really view ourselves as just like the starting place for having those conversations more easily, for looking at the same data at the same time. More specifically, kind of like what my head of product always says is, what's the next best conversation? So what we are hoping to do is organize a supply chain so that your head of sustainability, really exciting, actually. I think there's a lot of, maybe not a lot, but we are definitely talking to brands that are saying like, hey, we've been investing in offsets or we've been doing other things. Our CEO wants to know how we better transition our own supply chain to be more sustainable, which is such an exciting moment to be in. We want to help that person know who to call and what conversation to have with them based on the information is in front of them. So that's really like, can we serve up the right information and can we make it easier to dialogue?
That's incredible and really needed. Like, the clarity throughout a supply chain is such a huge part of the transition to a sustainable future. And you said there are people that say what needs to happen, but you're acting as a catalyst and a tool for the action of making it happen, which is a whole nother elevation.
We hope so. Yeah. We're having a lot of fun.
You're like one of the only other people that says that data is fun.
Yeah, we're a definite, like, a certain bunch that thinks the data is really fun.
Yeah.
Are the data points that you're collecting, like, is it the same for every brand, or is it tailored, I suppose, to the folks that sign up to your platform?
That's a really good question. So we have a set kind of, and it will grow over time, but we have what we have is like pre-built conversations at the farm level, at the kind of tier 2 and tier 3 levels. So we have, like, almost, you could think of them as conversational modules that we can plug into your back end, where it's like, okay, we know that this, where it might change is like someone has meters on machinery, and so they can already tell you like how much energy per, fabric meter, versus someone else that needs us to really walk through like all the different inputs to calculate that because they don't have it. But we also have kind of an expanding library of questions that kind of really dig in more deeply to different factors. So like, we kind of have your basic questions of emission factors, water use, chemicals, and whether or not kind of they're listed on REACH. We have questions about wages. We have questions about land use, but we also have questions where you could dig into biodiversity, or you could dig more into gender inequity, or hopefully equity. You could dig into a living wage more specifically. So we kind of have these different modules that you could add to customize. And then we do also like definitely work in a capacity where we can completely customize. And we do that for specific brands, definitely, that come in and say like, here's my goals and my questions.
But so they're prompts essentially for the suppliers to kind of fill in that information, and it's sort of guided through the process of.
Yeah, we try and make it super easy. Like, the way I like to describe it is that most supply chain questionnaires that you get are kind of like filling out your taxes by yourself for the first time without any help, and probably not in your language. And so we really try and look at all of that kind of, it's like, what percentage of your water is this? And it's like, gosh, you're asking someone like 5 different questions in that one question. Mm-hmm. So what we try and do is find what those 5 questions are and ask them instead, so that we are taking that kind of labor off of the person filling it in. And then, importantly, at the farm level, I think, we're asking questions typically on a weekly or bi-weekly basis, and we actually pay farmers for answering those questions. Often because, they're the ones that have the most data that needs to be shared, and because you're asking someone to take time and energy away from their farm.
That's huge. That compensation for their time that's definitely a plus. And I'm sure they're probably more happy to answer those questions than if somebody was just like, if you were just bugging them via email or something, that's a very different circumstance. Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
Wow. It's really cool.
What do you think? So supply chains in general and transparency is a hot topic I'd say, in our world, at least in the sustainability world. What do you think is the biggest misconception, the general public, around supply chain transparency amongst, raw material manufacturers and those like tier 3, like you mentioned?
I think the biggest misconception is if something has a certification on it, that means that the people that touched it or had a role in creating it are kind of covered by this certification, or like have gotten a chance to give input. I think that and not all certifications are created equal, right? But I think we've lived in this world of like, do you measure up to X thing? And I think when we talk about that shift in relationship and that shift in dynamic, there's a lot of, in transition to organic kind of not yet certified products, because a transition to organic takes several years, where you may not have any pesticides and you may not be using any chemicals, and you still can't get that organic certification, which means as a farmer that you're often putting a massive amount of money into an organic transition or a regenerative transition or whatever it is, and you're not able to charge more within current market dynamics. Mm-hmm. So I think that the biggest transition that or the biggest misconception is like, cool, I'm putting my money in the best place possible if it's certified. I think that the more that we can kind of think of a world in which we're sort of together in progress versus like, is it perfect? Has it gotten that stamp? The more we kind of open up the ability for people to raise their hand and say like, hey, I need help over here. And put resources there, right?
I fully agree with that. I think that, folks rely on certifications as sort of like a blanket, like we're doing good in everything, but there's so much nuance in all of those. And so, and I think that your platform really has the power to tell a lot better and a lot more detailed stories by brands, because you're not just defaulting to like, well, we're this certification, so
right,
end of story, right? Like, and I think a lot of brands do default to that.
Yeah, that's the hope, right? Because and we're definitely hearing brands say like, hey, I would like to, my ideal would be to work with farmers that are in transition. Only 1% of cotton globally is actually organic. So when you think about like the most possible, impact that you could create with your dollar, it's actually to put it towards someone that's trying to transition to regenerative or transition to organic and get over that hump. And what's been exciting is that a lot of the people that come to us are people that they're brands and manufacturers that want to invest in that transition, and say like, hey, I'm willing to bet that my customers will trust me more because I tell them that something's in transition or not perfect, and that will earn me more brand equity and more brand trust. I'm in a closer relationship with my customers than to constantly say that everything's already perfect. And I am so excited that starting to be the belief for some brands.
Yeah, I think we can confirm, but we've been in the sustainability world for 10 years, and 6 of those as a Dandelion, working with brands all over the world. People love the hero's journey. They love the story. They love exactly what you just said, that we're not perfect yet, but we're transitioning and we're helping other people transition. So when you buy from us, you are giving to somebody who's already organic. You're making organic larger. You're making regenerative agriculture larger. And we're going to share those stories too. And people love that. And they'll follow you as your costs increase if you grab them at that time too.
Right. And I think there's this rhetoric around like consumers don't care or consumers won't X. And, I feel a little bit like, you guys are kind of doing heroes work in the sense that, a lot of sustainability branding has been just that, like, give me a gold star because I'm doing everything perfectly. And we know that's not true. And so the more compelling and interesting and engaged you make that sustainability journey and work, come along with me and be a human in it with me, like that's something that people can actually join in.
Yeah, it's what they trust. Nobody, like, this is 2025. Nobody believes you that you're perfect. In fact, when you say I'm perfect, they go like,
yeah,
red flag.
I don't know where this idea that like consumers don't care about where their products come from, like where did that idea come from? Because I don't think that consumers have ever really been given the full opportunity to fully understand the supplier or where their products come from.
Right.
So like, can we experience it first? Yeah, right.
Comes from the data that says that people search for a product, then they look at prices, then they look at where it comes from, then they go back to prices and choose the lowest one. Because that's the consumer data that we have, but there aren't enough people out there sharing stories like Able Ecosystems is giving us in order to really make those informed decisions all the way.
Yeah. I mean, I love like some of my favorite nuance that has come out of supply chains is seeing like, you know, farmers that are, you know, already maybe like doing really well on water. They're already organic, but they're using a diesel pump because that's what's available in their region. But they would love to make the shift if there was investment into like a different kind of electricity pipeline locally, or, you know, hey, I've made this shift and I'd like to make a further shift, not because I think someone's going to buy it differently, because I don't want there to be chemicals around my kids, you know, and it's like very family oriented, and, or there's a social element where it's like, I want to change this animal welfare thing because it would change this in our community. And those stories are just so much more interesting than a SKU code on a bottle that tells you these are the 3 places it came from. Like, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know why I should care. So,
exactly.
All that to say, I'm a big fan of what you guys are doing.
Oh, we're a big fan of what you're doing.
All the data people.
Yeah.
Love it.
Yeah. I cannot wait for like kind of the future of this type of technology, and to see more and more brands kind of take that on and speak more directly, tell those more human stories so that, you know, their packaging can tell real human, real stories, not just like,
and be a real, what did you say, catalyst for connection, where we're so disconnected from our suppliers and even who grows our food and who makes our product and where, and the manufacturing that goes into everything. I don't know who manufactured this shirt. I know it's organic cotton or better cotton, but I don't know.
I've started to drive my friends nuts a little bit because the more I get into supply chain and know, the more I'll be like, I don't know that I would buy that. That's from such and such. But also the more excited I get around certain supply chains, right? Where you see like, I think the flip side of, oh gosh, consumers don't invest in things, we're not doing well, is that the deeper you get into this stuff personally, the more excited I get because there are so many people doing cool things.
Yes.
There's so, just as like so many of your clothes come from places that you wish they didn't and it's not great, the flip side is also true. And there are all these stories waiting, this like groundswell of incredible things happening that maybe we haven't reported yet because of regulation or we're not sure or whatever it is, but in opening up, like for people to be honest, there are also so many stories of change, I think, that are untold that are exciting.
Oh my gosh, I just got so excited. Thank you.
Yes.
I think that is a beautiful and inspiring place to leave off. So our last question is, if people want to connect with you, how can they find you?
Yeah. You can definitely check out our website, ableecosystems.com. And you can definitely email me, Shanley, at ableecosystems.com. And we are super excited to chat, definitely with brands, with manufacturers. We've also been approached by like farm groups that are going forward to market the other way. So yeah, we'd love to chat with you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for watching. We will see you next time.
See you next time.